The train's whistle pierced the desert air like a dying animal's cry, and Sarah clutched her worn leather satchel tighter against her chest. Dust swirled through the open windows, coating everything in grit that tasted of broken promises and desperate hope. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston, carrying nothing but her grandmother's wedding dress and a letter promising marriage to a rancher named Thomas Mitchell. The conductor's weathered face appeared in the doorway. "Step lively, Miss. Willow Creek Station." But as Sarah stepped onto the wooden platform, her heart plummeted. No rancher waited with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Instead, 3 men in military uniforms stood beside a tall figure whose long black hair gleamed in the afternoon sun. An Apache warrior, his face carved from stone and shadow. As the desert wind whips around this lonely station, I'm curious where in the world you're experiencing this story and what time it is in your corner of our vast world. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his medals catching the light. "Miss Sarah Hartford, I presume. There's been a change in arrangements. You're to marry Chief Running Bear here. It's part of the peace treaty." The words hit her like physical blows. This couldn't be happening. She had come seeking safety, a new life, perhaps even love. Not this. Not marriage to a stranger whose people she'd been taught to fear. Sarah's legs trembled as she stared at the man who was to become her husband. Chief Running Bear stood motionless, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, his broad shoulders draped in leather adorned with intricate beadwork that caught the fading sunlight. Captain Morrison cleared his throat impatiently. "The treaty requires this union, Miss. Chief Running Bear has agreed to keep the peace in exchange for this arrangement. You'll be treated well." Running Bear finally spoke, his voice deep and measured like distant thunder. "She is afraid." His English carried only the slightest accent, surprising her with its clarity. "Of course she's afraid," the captain snapped. "But this is bigger than personal feelings. This is about preventing war between our peoples." The chief's gaze never left Sarah's face. "She has traveled far. She needs rest and food before we speak of marriage." His unexpected consideration pierced through her panic. She had expected savagery, demands, perhaps violence. Instead, this imposing warrior showed more concern for her well-being than the military men who had orchestrated this betrayal. "I did not choose this either," he said quietly, stepping closer. "But perhaps we can find understanding between us." The desert wind carried the scent of sage and something else, something wild and clean that seemed to emanate from him. Despite her terror, Sarah found herself drawn to the gentle sadness in his eyes. The Apache village spread before Sarah like something from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare she couldn't yet distinguish. Dozens of hide lodges dotted the valley floor, smoke rising from cooking fires that painted the evening sky in shades of amber and rose. Children's laughter echoed off the canyon walls, a sound so unexpectedly joyful it made her chest ache with homesickness. Running Bear walked his horse slowly, allowing her time to absorb this new world. Women looked up from their work, their faces curious but not unkind. Men nodded respectfully to their chief, their eyes assessing the pale woman who rode beside him. "My lodge is there," he said, pointing to a large structure at the village's heart. "You will have your own space until you decide if you can accept this life." Sarah's throat constricted with gratitude. He was offering her choice when she had expected none. An elderly woman approached, her weathered hands gentle as she helped Sarah dismount. "This is Ayana, my grandmother," Running Bear explained. "She will teach you our ways if you wish to learn them." The old woman's eyes held depths of wisdom that reminded Sarah of her own grandmother. Ayana spoke in Apache, her voice melodic and soothing, then turned to Running Bear with what sounded like gentle scolding. "She says you look hungry and tired, and that men know nothing about caring for traveling women. She will feed you and find you clean clothes." For the first time since leaving Boston, Sarah felt the possibility of kindness in this strange new world. Sarah woke to the gentle sound of water being poured into a basin. Running Bear knelt beside the fire, his movements careful and quiet. Steam rose from a pot of what smelled like stew, rich with herbs she couldn't identify. He had risen before dawn to prepare food for her, this powerful chief who could command warriors with a glance. "You do not need to serve me," she whispered, embarrassed by his thoughtfulness. "It is not service," he replied, ladling the fragrant mixture into a carved wooden bowl. "Among my people, Caring for guests is honor, not burden. The stew warmed her from within, flavors both foreign and comforting dancing on her tongue. As she ate, Running Bear sat across the fire, working leather with skilled hands. The repetitive motions seemed to calm him, just as her grandmother's knitting had always soothed Sarah's anxious moments. "You miss your home," he observed without looking up from his work. "Yes, but perhaps home was never a place for me. Perhaps it was always just hope for somewhere I could belong." He set down his tools and studied her face in the firelight. Belonging cannot be forced. It grows slowly like trust. Outside, the village stirred to life. Children's voices mingled with the soft conversations of women beginning their daily tasks. The sounds were different from Boston's harsh clatter, gentler somehow, more connected to the rhythms of earth and sky. "What burdens do you carry as chief?" she asked quietly. His hands stilled on the leather, the weight of two worlds that must somehow learn to coexist. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson as Running Bear led Sarah to a quiet pool hidden among the rocks. "Here," he said, "you will learn to read the language of the earth." He knelt beside the water, his fingers tracing patterns in the sand. "This track belongs to deer. See how the hoofs point? They came to drink at dawn." His voice carried the patience of someone who understood that wisdom took time to grow. Sarah knelt beside him, her skirts gathering dust she no longer minded. In Boston, she had been taught that knowledge came from books. Here, it lived in wind patterns and animal signs, in the way shadows fell across stone. "Your people see only what they expect to see," Running Bear continued, his dark eyes meeting hers. "But survival requires seeing what is truly there." As they walked back through the village, Sarah noticed things she had missed before. The way mothers sang while grinding corn. How the men carved arrows with the same reverence priests showed handling communion wine. Everything held meaning, purpose, connection. While you learn to see this beautiful world through new eyes, I wonder what part of the world you're seeing it from and whether the sun is rising or setting where you are right now. Ayana approached with a leather pouch filled with seeds. "Time to plant," she announced in careful English, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "What will grow?" Sarah asked, accepting the small treasures. Running Bear smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "Hope, if we tend it carefully." Evening found Sarah and Running Bear sharing a meal by the fire, the silence between them no longer heavy with fear but comfortable as worn leather. She had learned to appreciate these quiet moments when words felt unnecessary, when the crackling flames spoke their own language of warmth and safety. He carved as he often did after eating, his knife moving with precision through a piece of pine. The emerging shape reminded Sarah of a bird in flight, wings spread wide against invisible currents. "For you," he said simply, offering the nearly finished carving. Sarah's fingers trembled as she accepted it. No one had ever made something beautiful just for her. In Boston, gifts came with expectations, obligations. This felt different. "Pure." "Why?" she whispered. "Because you are learning to fly in a world not made for your wings." The metaphor pierced her heart with its truth. She had always felt caged by society's narrow definitions of what a woman should be. Here, despite the strangeness, despite the fear that still flickered at the edges of her thoughts, she felt space to breathe. "Tell me about your first wife," she found courage to ask. His hands stilled on the carving. "Morning Star was gentle like spring rain. She died bringing our son into the world. Both of them returned to the earth the same day." The pain in his voice made Sarah's chest ache. "You carry great sorrow." "As do you," he replied. "I see it in your eyes when you think no one watches. Perhaps that is why we were brought together. Not for politics or treaties, but because broken hearts recognize each other." The thunder of approaching horses shattered the peaceful morning like breaking glass. Sarah dropped the basket of corn she had been carrying as dust clouds announced the arrival of soldiers. Captain Morrison rode at the head of the column, his face grim beneath the shadow of his hat. Running Bear emerged from his lodge, his bearing instantly transformed from gentle teacher to formidable chief. The warriors of the village appeared as if from nowhere, forming a protective circle around their leader and the woman who had become precious to them all. "Chief Running Bear," Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the tense silence. "There's been trouble. Some of your young men attacked a supply wagon near Devil's Canyon." "That is impossible," Running Bear replied, his voice steady as stone. My warriors are here in the village. Maybe your control isn't as strong as you think. The captain sneered. The treaty demands justice. Someone must answer for this crime. Sarah felt the fragile peace they had built beginning to crumble like autumn leaves. She stepped forward before fear could stop her. Captain Morrison, surely there must be some mistake. These people have shown nothing but honor since I arrived. As tensions rise like storm clouds in this desert canyon, I'm wondering what storms you might be weathering in your own corner of the world tonight. The captain's eyes narrowed on her. You've been here barely a month, miss. Don't pretend to understand these savages. Running Bear's jaw tightened at the slur, but his voice remained controlled. We will investigate these claims, but we will not be condemned without proof. The investigation revealed the bitter truth like poison seeping through clean water. A group of displaced Apache from another tribe, driven from their lands by broken promises, had attacked the wagon in desperation. They wore war paint and clothing similar to Running Bear's people, making identification nearly impossible for terrified witnesses. Morrison slammed his fist on the wooden table they had set up in the village center. I don't care if they weren't your men, Chief. Apache is Apache. Someone pays for this crime or the treaty is void. Sarah watched Running Bear's face as he weighed impossible choices. She had learned to read the subtle tightening around his eyes that meant he was calculating costs no man should have to bear. The peace he had worked so hard to build hung by threads as fragile as spider silk. You want blood for blood, Running Bear said finally. But killing innocent people for the crimes of others is not justice. The white settlers want revenge, Morrison snapped. They don't care about your tribal distinctions. Give me 3 warriors or I'll take 30. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what Running Bear was considering. He would sacrifice himself and others to protect his people, just as he had sacrificed his freedom to marry her for peace. Without thinking, she stepped between the two men. There is another way. Both men stared at her as if she had sprouted wings. I know those settlements, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I can speak to the families who lost goods. I can help them understand the difference between justice and revenge. The ride to Willow Creek took 3 days, Sarah traveling between Running Bear and his most trusted warriors while Captain Morrison led his soldiers ahead. Her heart pounded as familiar buildings came into view, reminding her of the life she had left behind, the world that had never truly accepted her. The town hall overflowed with angry settlers, their faces hard with grief and fury. Sarah had dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, hoping to bridge the gap between the refined Eastern woman they expected and the changed person she had become. Running Bear stood silent and dignified as accusations flew like arrows. The crowd wanted blood, wanted someone to pay for their losses. Sarah felt their hatred washing over the man she had come to love, and something fierce awakened in her chest. She rose slowly, her voice cutting through the chaos. I am Sarah Hartford. Some of you know me as the mail-order bride who disappeared into Apache territory. I stand before you now as witness to the truth. The room fell silent, shocked by her transformation from the timid woman who had arrived months ago. Chief Running Bear and his people had nothing to do with the attack on your wagon. The guilty parties were desperate refugees, driven to violence by starvation and broken promises. But if you seek revenge against innocent people, you become no better than those who wronged you. A woman in the front row stood, tears streaming down her weathered face. They killed my husband. Someone must pay. Sarah's voice softened with compassion. I understand your pain, but taking innocent lives will not bring him back. It will only create more widows, more orphans, more hatred. The tension in the town hall stretched tight as a bowstring ready to snap. Sarah felt the weight of 2 worlds balanced on her words, knowing that the wrong phrase could shatter the fragile peace forever. Behind her, Running Bear remained motionless, but she could sense his readiness to protect his people at any cost. Mrs. Henderson, the widow whose husband had died in the attack, wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. What would you have us do, Miss Hartford? Forget? Forgive? Pretend our losses don't matter? Sarah stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. I ask you to see what I have learned. Chief Running Bear feeds the hungry, protects the weak, and honors his word even when it costs him everything. He married me not for love but for peace. He sacrificed his freedom for yours. A murmur rippled through the crowd as her words sank in. The true criminals will be found and punished according to law, Sarah continued. But if you destroy the innocent in your quest for justice, you become the very thing you claim to fight against. Running Bear finally spoke, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the room. My people will help rebuild what was lost. We will share our winter stores with those who suffered. This is how we make things right. As these two worlds find a way toward understanding, I can't help but wonder what bridges you're building in your own community tonight, wherever in this wide world you might be. Captain Morrison stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps we can find a solution that serves justice without destroying peace. Sarah felt Running Bear's hand briefly touch her shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and something deeper that made her heart sing with hope. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at the edge of the Apache village watching the most extraordinary sight she had ever witnessed. Settlers and Apache worked side by side, building new storage houses for the coming winter. Mrs. Henderson knelt beside Ayanna, learning to weave baskets while sharing stories of her late husband. Children from both communities chased each other between the lodges, their laughter bridging languages and cultures. Running Bear approached from behind, his footsteps quiet on the packed earth. You have built something beautiful here, he said softly. We built it together, Sarah replied, turning to face the man who had become so much more than a husband forced upon her by treaty. Every day, she discovered new depths to his character, new reasons to admire his strength and gentleness. The peace negotiations had concluded successfully, with terms that honored both communities. Sarah had been officially appointed as liaison between the settlements and the Apache, a role that felt like destiny finally revealing itself. In Boston, I was nobody, she confessed as they walked toward their shared lodge. Here, I am part of something larger than myself. Running Bear stopped and took her hands in his calloused ones. In Boston, they could not see who you truly are. Here, your spirit shines like stars in clear sky. The carved bird he had made for her hung from a leather cord around her neck, its wings spread in eternal flight. She touched it gently, remembering the frightened woman who had arrived on that dusty platform months ago. Tonight, I want to be your wife truly, she whispered, not from duty or treaty but from choice. Spring arrived with gentle rain that turned the desert into a carpet of wildflowers, purple and gold stretching toward distant mountains. Sarah stood in the doorway of their lodge, one hand resting on her growing belly, watching Running Bear teach a group of mixed children how to track deer through the blooming meadows. The past year had transformed everything. The trading post they had established together thrived, bringing prosperity to both communities. Marriages had formed between settlers and Apache, creating new families that belonged to both worlds and neither, just as Sarah herself had learned to do. Mrs. Henderson visited weekly now, her grief softened by friendship with Ayanna and pride in her adopted Apache grandson. The boy had been orphaned in a different raid, and her decision to raise him had healed something broken in both their hearts. Running Bear returned as the sun began its descent, gathering Sarah into his arms with the tenderness that still made her heart flutter like butterfly wings. Their child would grow up knowing both legacies, speaking both languages, building bridges their parents had only dreamed possible. Have I ever told you about the prophecy? He murmured against her hair. My grandmother said a woman would come from the rising sun, bringing peace that would last 7 generations. As this beautiful story of love conquering fear comes to an end, I'm thinking of all of you listening from your own corners of the world, and hoping you too have found or will find the kind of love that transforms everything. Sarah smiled, touching the carved bird at her throat. I came seeking survival and found something far more precious. I found home in the most unexpected place, in the heart of a man who taught me what true love really means.